Welcome back to the Real Recovery Show, where we air every week on Fridays at noon. And today's episode, we're going to be talking about the sex industry and recovery. What happened before we got into recovery, and if we're still working in the sex industry, how that's been affecting our whole outlook and how we behave and how we see everything in the industry. And so I'm joined here with three other beautiful women who are either in the industry currently or who have left the industry and who are all also in recovery from alcohol and drugs, etc. And so I'll start off talking a little bit about myself, which I tend to do. And I'll just talk about specifically my childhood growing up as it pertains to this topic. When I was growing up, I was born to a mother who was an ex-model and who subsequently gained a lot of weight when I was growing up. She ended up being about 350 pounds, somewhere around that. But she married my dad on the rebound, and my dad was very charming, very good looking, and instantly, right when they were married and she was pregnant, I know of from him telling me as well that he had cheated on her. And so when I was a kid, my first presents when I was born in the hospital were from his mistress. And so there was a dynamic and energy, a psychology, if you will, in my house growing up that was very, very focused on sex, body, sexuality, what you look like, etc., overtly and covertly, meaning people talking about it and people not talking about it, just things going in the air about how people having body shame, etc. When I was growing up, as I've said in a previous episode, I spent a lot of time by myself. I was made fun of by the kids in school and called names like ugly and fat, and I just didn't have the confidence for various reasons that I've also mentioned before to stand up for myself. And at the time, and this will date me a little bit, Cablevision started, cable TV, and Playboy came on, and before they started having more censoring, even MTV had nudity in it, and there was Playboy magazines in the house and different porn, and my dad walked around in his underwear all the time, and there was just in my mind a strong emphasis on sexy, on women, on all of that. And I grew up looking at magazines. I grew up going downstairs to the basement. I grew up in New York, and I ended up taking the controls for the TV, which was this long bar of controls with 3 rows to it, and clicking whatever 2 channels at the same time would get me access to the Playboy channel once they realized that we had kids and they started putting parental controls and all that other stuff. So I would be sitting, and if you could picture this, I would be sitting in the basement with this TV and the static, like as if the child in Poltergeist watching it, looking and making out like these bodies on TV. And the reason why I was so fascinated and focused on the pictures and the TV and all of that, I mean, even my Barbie doll and my Ken doll never had clothes on, was because I was so preoccupied with who I thought I needed to be loved, and from ideas of my dad not being with my mom anymore, my mom having body shame herself, etc. And also, how do I make myself feel better? And there was something about both of those that was an element in it. Throughout my childhood, there was this preoccupation with sex and sexuality, and I spent a lot of time flying solo, if you know what that means, and modeling in front of the mirror and dancing in front of the mirror. This will also date me. The movie Flashdance came out, and by then I was like, this is amazing, and I wanted to be this fictitious character in this movie. And so I ended up going to college for for teaching and then for business management. And I had a 3.9 average, and I ended up getting half a scholarship to go to Stony Brook University to study science. My parents were losing their house and told me that I needed to drop out of college and help support the house. I did that, dropped out, and I couldn't figure out what I was supposed to do to make enough money to pay the bills, and ended up getting a job waitressing in a topless bar. I was bulimic. I was way into my addictions at the time, but bulimia was the main addiction at the time. And I would eat, and then I would throw out my food, and I would exercise to keep my body the way I thought I wanted to keep it. But I was so insecure, guys. There was no way I was getting on stage. And so for 7 months, I watched everything. I studied that whole business from every angle of it. And I was like, you know what? I'm not making enough money being a waitress, even though I was good at. And I ended up getting on stage. And that's what I was never going to do. I would never have had the confidence to do it. And my life took me in a direction that allowed for me to fulfill that. And so that's how I got into the sex industry. I ended up dancing for a really long time and doing private shows, etc. And it became, for me, an amazing classroom for me to build my sense of empowerment and self-esteem. So I'll say this last thing before I turn it over to the other beautiful ladies. I did not have an attitude like what I was doing was bad. I knew that other people could have that attitude, but I really felt like what I was doing was the best thing that I could be doing at the time. I saved my parents' house 3 times from getting foreclosed on, and I helped people with it. But more importantly, I started to grow and heal from a tremendous amount of psychological shutdown that I experienced. I started to have my own money, my own empowerment. I started to feel better about the way that I looked. I started to feel like less and less of a victim. And so it was, for me, it was an amazing experience that if I went back in time, I would do it again. And I'm saying that even though some people would think that for sure with 23 years clean and sober, that's not what I would be saying at this time. But I really, truly believe that for the time I was in it, it was exactly what I needed it to be. And it wasn't that it was all good all the time. It was definitely an adventure, especially with drugs and alcohol involved. But it was definitely where I was supposed to be. And I see the divine purpose of it for me. And so at this point, I'm going to introduce you to Ashley Shavira, who's going to share a little bit about what got her into the sex industry and what she ended up doing.
All right. Hi, I'm Ashley. Thanks for having me, Lisa, and thanks for sharing your story. So the beginning. So I grew up in a family of addicts. Father was an abusive alcoholic, mentally, physically, emotionally, and my mother struggled as well with her own addictions. She was enabling, and, my acting out started when I was probably around, 12. So like your story, my mom, she loved staying thin. I watched her learn how to diet and exercise obsessively. I watched her count her calories to all of her food, and, by the time I was 13, I became obsessed on that too. And I started to research anorexia and bulimia, and I was that was my first addiction. It was okay, yes, let's starve ourselves. Let's change the way we feel to cope with my parents fighting all the time and all this other stuff. And the thinner I got, the better I felt about myself. And, at that point, I had really big daddy issues, right? My dad wasn't there for me like a father, should. So yeah, men was definitely my next addiction. I was always finding a boyfriend. I was always leaning on another next fling, and it started with, my first broken heart too, and how I lost my virginity. I'll talk about that, if that's okay.
Talk about anything.
So my first puppy love relationship, I really loved him, right? It was my first 1-year relationship, and I was 13, and he broke up with me because I wouldn't have sex with him. I wasn't ready. And after that, I was just so broken, and I'm like, okay, well, let's find another guy. And so I found this bad boy, and he drank, and I started going to these punk rock shows, and that was my first, experience of learning how to party and drink and just be carefree. And so I decided, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to give it up to this guy after 2 weeks of dating, thinking he would stay with me. And he broke up with me the next day. So that's how I lost my virginity. And that's how the whole, sex equaling love is it's not what I imagined it to be. And so, I just went about my life. I went about my life just leaning on to guys, hooking up, drinking in gym class, doing these crazy things, getting piercings in the middle of gym class, and just finding all these ways to act out. And, I was kicked out of middle school for possession, and went to high school. Couldn't wait to get out of high school. And, at that point, my parents finally had this conversation with me about wanting me to be better than them, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to be my own person. I'm going to, try to just get my life focused and not so much on partying. So I went to college. I did. I went to college, got my associates, got my bachelor's in psychology. And at that point, you study these classes and you start to diagnose yourself, right, of what you struggle with, depression, anxiety, and I knew I had an eating disorder. But I always wanted to be healthy. I always wanted to be healthy. I always wanted to just be better and, learn from the choices I made. But addiction is it's very hard. I had my first DUI at 18. I had my second DUI at 23. And I couldn't stop. I didn't know how to recover. So what happened, I was in my last semester of graduating my bachelor's in psychology, and I met this guy, right? It's always, I always meet a guy, and it's always part of my story. So I met this guy, and he was a male dancer. He did the bachelorette parties, and I was attracted to it. I liked the lifestyle, and he introduced me to the party drugs, cocaine, Molly. Eventually, I tried crystal, but and I met a stripper. And at that point, man, I couldn't hold a job. Got fired from maybe 3 jobs in 6 months to a year. And I said, you know what, it looks good. And I was also working at a sex store. I was working in the sex store at that time, and I was exposed to that, and I loved it. I loved meeting the dancers. I loved hearing about how much money they made, how good they felt, and how they loved the lifestyle. And I got fired from that sex store job, and I'm like, I'm gonna be a stripper. So yeah, there I went. I did it for a few years. Luckily, I got out sooner than later, but so eventually that relationship was toxic, right? Obviously. And my first abusive relationship was him got out of that, and I was single for the first time in a long time, to just do my own thing and be free and experiment. And it was so ego inflating, right? And I completely lost my identity. I didn't think about school. I didn't think about going back. I didn't think about who I was anymore. And my relationship with my parents was gone. Like, I burned my bridges with all the people who loved me and cared about me. And I was just left with me and my addiction and my ego and my pride. And eventually, the pain was great enough, and I started talking to people, and I came across a guy. He was in recovery, and it was over social media. But the whole it takes one person to change your life and show you that there's another way out is completely real for me, and I try to give that back as well. So we were friends. We were just friends, right? And he accepted me for who I was, and I watched him. I watched him in his recovery and rebuild his life, and it was so attractive, right? And for the first time, I met somebody who showed me intimacy, right? It wasn't just about sex, and he was the first guy in about 3 years that I gave it up to without wanting something in return.
Nice. And
so, it was some tough love, though. And finally, I tried doing my way, though. I tried only smoking weed first. I tried only drinking. I tried, cutting back or only snorting a few lines in the club to get me through. But I'm powerless. I tried all my ways because I like doing things the hard way. And, I knew I had a second DUI still hanging over my shoulder. And I told myself that I was going to just make some money to pay off debt, get back to school. But I had nothing to show for it. Like, I could not stop using. And the other addiction that manifested was gambling. So all these things to change the way I feel and to not, revisit myself again. The pain was great enough, and I really wanted to die. I tried a couple times, but family did get in the way, and they were like, we're going to help you. Whatever it takes, do what you got to do. So, I claimed my clean date, and I was like, I'm done. Like, I know what to do. I was shown the tools, and now I need to apply them in my life. So I did, I danced a few months clean and just did the next best thing. I got a normal job, tried to rebuild everything, and now today, I have a little over 3 years clean, and I have a normal job. I live a very simple life. I go to the gym. I eat healthy. I don't gamble anymore. So, I'm just doing everything that I can to refocus. And I'm single. I'm single. Yeah, it's been great. I'm not used to it, but it feels good to just focus on myself again. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we're going to talk to Brittney Andrews, who's going to tell us a little bit about how it happened to make her get involved with porn and being in Playboy and all that. And go ahead.
Well, I like to be a rebel. So is the microphone in the right place?
No, you're good.
Okay, fabulous. I want to make sure that I'm heard by the world. No. Anyways, so I like to be a rebel. So I'm going to actually start from now and go backwards. So first and foremost, I've been in the adult entertainment industry for 31 years. I have retired at one point for 10 years, and then I came back in. And something that we often hear in recovery is recovery has given me a life beyond my wildest dreams. And I'm like, I know that the adult industry has given me a life beyond my wildest, like for real, for real. Because I got stories that we could, be here all day long, 30 years running around the world. But yeah, no, I'm extremely, extremely grateful that the universe found a way for me to get into this business. And it has been so all-encompassing my entire adult life. And for myself, I've always been somebody that, obviously to be in it for 30 years, you can't be somebody that the business like ate you up and spit you out. So I've always been very much of a businesswoman first and foremost when it came to the industry. And that kind of starts, my talk of addictions, right? My first and foremost addiction, 100%, that I'm still working on to this day. And I have a sponsor for it. And I go to, and I am in recovery for that as well. So, but yeah, which is workaholism. And it's funny because, when I first started my recovery on workaholism, it was in New York. And I thought that, my workaholism started when I started working. But when I look back at school, I was an A++ student. I went to like a Baptist school that, was like from kindergarten to 12th grade. And I was always on the honorable mention. I was one of the few students that, got to like leave my cubicle and go work anywhere because I was always A++. At the end of the day, as I've worked on my recovery, one might say I have a portfolio of issues. So, workaholism is my number one issue, at least at the moment. And so then obviously, though, for me to be able to work on all of the different portfolio of issues that I have, the foundation of my recovery is to make sure that I'm staying sober from drugs and alcohol. So I got sober. As I said, I started this whole thing about 11 years ago. I got sober originally in New York City. And originally I decided to get sober because I had, had some boundaries with myself that I felt I had went over. And, it wasn't my first time doing recovery, and I didn't somehow hear the first time that I did recovery that I was like supposed to like be abstinent for the rest of my life. If I had heard that, I don't know if I would have went, and started recovery again. But at that point, I obviously was ready for it and started the process. And, I have 2 autoimmune diseases. So my lupus was like a really big deal with it. And actually my relapse, I figured, okay, well, my lupus is fine. So, let me go back out again, and try to relive my youth. And cause, I'd moved from New York to Vegas, and there was all these places that I had not been to in Vegas. And I'm like, oh my God, I could meet like really hot guys and get laid. And then I went into them, and it was like all of these old dudes, like smoking cigarettes, like putting quarters into the machines. And I'm like, man, I really should have checked out these places before I relapsed, because I am not getting laid at all. But yeah, and so then when I came back into recovery again, I realized that I needed to be sober for more than just my lupus, more than just drugs and alcohol, but for my mental health. Yeah. Because I do have this portfolio of issues of not just, workaholism, not just drugs, not just alcohol, depression, anxiety, all these different issues that, originally started from having a lot of early childhood trauma. I originally got into the business when I was 17. Shh, don't tell anybody. I had a fake ID. I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And yes, I do love cheese, and I'm not into the Packers. And, the place that I first started off at, it was a strip club. I started off as a stripper, had literally like a basement pole with duct tape around it. I mean, it was so ghetto. There was like drive-by shootings on the outside. And, and at that time, I didn't even really drink all that much. It wasn't until my 30s that I started drinking because I couldn't do as much drugs. And, I started, off at that strip club, and then I started feature dancing around the world, and then I started doing magazines, and then I started doing movies. But my addictions had started, obviously, as I already talked about, workaholism in school. And by the time I was 13, I was actually shooting up. And so I started off with marijuana. I never really did alcohol at all when I was younger. I did a lot of acid. I did 33 hits of acid at one time when I was 13. Me and two people did like an entire sheet of acid, put it in between the three of us. And so by the time, I got into the business, I had already kind of done my first round of like being sober. It's like, oh, well, I'm only smoking weed, and I wasn't even really drinking then yet. So, my addictions have been a roller coaster, and they still are. I definitely am not somebody that has got this, There's a lot, like I said, I had a lot of childhood trauma, and I'm in recovery for that as well, whatever that consists of, one of my friends, she likes to say that she's in recovery with a capital R. And I like that statement because I do have a portfolio of different issues. And just because I got sober doesn't mean that my life got perfect and I became perfect. It's like I still have so much work to do on myself. And I'm grateful that for myself as a sex worker, that the business has never been not even close to a trigger for my drug and alcohol use. It was actually the opposite.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah. It was actually, I'll end with this. It was actually the opposite because I'd always had sex as a sex worker sober. When I became sober, all of my sex felt like work sex. And I was like, oh, this sucks. And that took forever, but we'll talk about that later.
Thank you so much. All right. And now finally joined with us is Reagan Riley, who is currently a circuit stripper, right? You dance.
I do feature dancing. Regular
pole
dancing. Yeah.
Competitions and
Yes.
all that very athletic stuff that I was never able to do.
Yes.
But here we go.
All right. So thank you for having me on the show. And I'm so happy we're all here. This is super, super awesome. My sobriety date is April 19th, 2012. And I'm very grateful for that. A little bit of background. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania. I was exposed to drug and alcohol use at a young age. My mom was a bartender, so I remember being in bars when I was young. And it was around 6th grade when I first found a bong, and I didn't know what it was. And I started to notice the drug use behavior in my growing up area. I still get nervous doing these too. There was drug and alcohol use in the home where I grew up, and I started to get curious, and I was like, yeah, I want to experiment. I want to try things. And so it was easily accessible, and I was 14 the first time I tried weed, and drinking the first time I drank until I blacked out and threw up, and I thought this was awesome. And then high school was, all experimental with hallucinogens, taking pills, cocaine, crack, ecstasy. Like I just wanted to try everything. And then I was 17 when I tried opiates and started injecting opiates, OxyContin, heroin. And then 17 through 21 was when I was in and out of rehab for opiates. And I was 18 when I started dancing. And for me, I always wanted to be an exotic dancer. I think it was partly the music and cultural influences of music videos, watching MTV. I still remember like some of the songs I'd hear dancing at home in the mirror, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a stripper. And that was even before I got into drugs and alcohol. And I remember growing up, like me and my cousins would always play dress up, and like I just loved to dress up sexy and act sexy, and like I had a little karaoke machine, and I just liked it. I liked to like play dress up, and I'd always say, yeah, I'm gonna be a stripper. And when I turned 18, that was what I did. I went to a little dive bar strip club. I remember being in senior lounge. I wasn't 18 yet, and I heard like a radio ad, and I called the club. I was like, I'm not 18 yet, but you know, I want to audition. And they're like, when you turn 18, come to the club. And so that was what I did. And so now August is actually, I've been an exotic dancer for 14 years. And yeah, that's part of my story.
All right, awesome. Thank you. At this point, we're going to go to break. Please remember that the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and do not represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. See you in a bit. Welcome back to the Real Recovery Show. We were talking to these beautiful ladies, Reagan and Brittney and Ashley, about being in and out of the sex industry and as it relates to recovery. And there was something that happened for me because when I was dancing and doing private shows, I made so much money, and I feel like for me later when I got out of the industry, it ended up, it was very difficult for me to change my career because my mind was so focused on how I made money and how fast I made money. And whenever I would see somebody, I would think about that. Or if I was in any kind of financial fear, I would think about that. And so when I bottomed from alcohol and drugs, etc., I was very, very sick. And I started having seizures. I had immune issues that were stimulated. And I felt extremely shut down. I was sensitive. I have hypoglycemia already genetically, and it was a hot mess. And with all the unhealed PTSD, and now coming off of all the alcohol, the drugs, and everything, for me, the first time I quit dancing, I quit because I was really, really, really super sick. But when I was focusing on healing and getting better, there was just this trajectory of, when I can, I want to get back on stage. When I can, I want to go back to doing private shows. Because for me, it was I don't know, I can't explain it other than I felt like my best self in that environment. I felt like it was like the land of the misfit toys, like I felt like all the other dancers and the people that attended the clubs and the people that hired me for private shows, it just felt like that they were all my people, if that makes any sense. And I don't know, it wasn't that I wasn't focused on spirituality and a higher power and stuff, because I actually was, especially my second go around, because I was focusing so much on healing and recovery. I know I have 23 years, but I actually stopped alcohol and drugs when I was 23, and but I ended up drinking again when I was 27, and so I've been sober since then. Don't be doing math. And but I really it's still with me, you know, like the bulimic mentality is still with me. I've had to heal from a lot of body issues, how I relate with men, and how I saw myself as a woman. And so what I'd like to talk about now is, there's so many topics in here, but really just the way we saw people and the way we saw money, and whether or not we stayed in the industry or we left the industry, our thinking had to change. You know, like if we wanted to be healthy and we wanted to be spiritual and we wanted to be more authentic to ourselves, if there was anything where we were coming from a, using people kind of perspective, or seeing everything as a means to an end, you know, keeping people at an arm's distance so that we weren't feeling threatened and vulnerable, you know, as was mentioned already, maybe our false narrative around what intimacy really looks like, you know, for a long time believing that it has to do with sex, and then finding out that true intimacy is being vulnerable and really joining and sharing authentically and honestly with another person. For me, I feel like it might even be a lifelong shift for me. I'll say this last thing, and then I'll open up for anybody to pop in and join this discussion on this. Even with having like the meeting space, right? So when we were going through COVID, and I used up all of my savings to keep that place open. And I had, not in the beginning of COVID, because even the strip clubs were closed, but I'm just saying there was this, like, when you're in fear, there are old parts of you that come back and go, do you need me now? What about now? And there was a part of me that was like, man, I still look good. I probably could do something, you know, all because I'm in love with the meeting space and the recovery store, and would do, in my mind, anything to keep it open. And so I started having those thoughts come to my mind. And it's like the same for me as my addiction, because I live a life now that I really can't do those things. And my intuition will tell me that's not for you, girlfriend. And but yet my inner stripper will have its own little voice, and I'll listen to it and not do it. But it's so interesting. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about how over time the thinking of how we see our bodies, and in our next episode that we are all going to talk about, we'll talk more about, body issues and stuff like that, but really more so like the purpose for interacting with people, and how we feel about making money, and how that's changed over time. So anybody want to start? Okay. Wow. I promise you, we're all very talkative people.
I can share, I guess.
Okay,
so, shoot. Well, since I got clean, so I'm still a baby in this thing, right? Like, I still struggle with a lot of the things that I struggled with before. But yeah, when I first got clean, like, you know, the obsession of body image and staying skinny, because, right, like drugs kept me skinny. And that was really important to me throughout this process of not gaining so much weight, because that's all I would hear about is, oh, you're going to get healthy, you're going to gain weight. And that was my fear. So I watched myself really carefully. And but I'm healthy, like I exercise healthy, you know. And yeah, I mean, my first few months, I danced clean until I couldn't anymore, until the bag of dope was on the table, and it was like either you do it or you walk away. You know, I had two options, like, did I want to live or do I want to die? So that's like the mindset that I wake up every day, like either I work on myself and live today or I die.
So do you feel like that when you think of your bottom or you think of your drugs and alcohol and how you have to stay away from that, do you also put dancing in there with it because the whole thing was like a combination for you?
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was definitely a combination of everything. Like, I knew if I stayed in the lifestyle, I was gonna, you know, fall and just hit rock bottom and die.
Yeah.
You know? And
I think that for me, because one of my addictions is sex addiction, I think that, and I definitely have workaholism, obviously, but I definitely have had sex addiction. I happen to think that sex addiction was probably my first addiction, and codependency, and then, you know, food, and then alcohol, and then later drugs. But
the portfolio of issues
portfolio,
that I was
no,
talking about earlier.
I'm a smorgasbord of addiction. Like, you know, I just, but I do feel like, for me, I feel like why my intuition is saying that for me, I got to a place where, I don't know if you've ever done this or heard about it, but there's this thing called dancer vacations. And so what ends up happening is, you end up working like double shifts and then back-to-back double shifts, and you do tons of private shows, and you make a whole bunch of money, and then you just take time off. And then you go and you do it again, and then what was happening is I was doing this routine, and then I was taking longer and longer vacations to the point where I had to realize something's up with me if I'm not wanting to do it. I was making more money than I had ever made when I stopped. I made $8,000 in one day, and that was a lot for me. And ironically, the person that I did the private show for ended up having to stop our private shows because he said that somebody told him, he was worried about him, that he has a sex addiction and that I am the drug. And so, which is ironic because I have had to heal from my own sex addiction. But I feel like that's, for me, I ended up dry during the day. I would work, I would dance, and then towards the end of the night, people started becoming less and less people, and they would be now money, and then my mind wouldn't even be present at all, and I would be thinking about what I was going to do when I got off work, and this became my routine. And then I would go and I would use and I would eat and I would binge, and I would wake up in the morning and start all over again with 3 cups of coffee and be a perfect little girl all day, eating little cans of tuna and on this like stupid, like no alcohol, no drugs. I mean, the people thought I was sober because people would always go to me with their problems, and when somebody turned up missing or dead, like the homicide detectives would talk to me because I looked like I was sober, but I was dry. I was not really like having any shifts in perception. But I think that for me, in alignment with what you were saying, is that it would activate a lot of my ideas of what my worth is for me these days. Mm-hmm. I think it would bring back my using my body to get what I want, and to not for me do the other things that I would need to do. And so for me, it's just,
can I jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me be the opposite side of that. So for myself, like I said, I've been in the business for a very long time, and I was very disciplined the majority of my career. I started feature dancing at the age of 18. I think only maybe 1 year I drank when I danced, and I got arrested in Guam for like punching the lighter shade of brown, like some band back then. And I was like, okay, that's not for me. Like, I need to stay sober when I'm working. And so the majority of like, I mean, even after 30 years of being in the business, I think there's only been like two or three films of like where I'm wasted. And one of them I got paid to get wasted on it. One of them I think was an accident. And I'll say there probably is another one that maybe I don't remember. But, I always was very like work is work and getting fucked up is getting fucked up, So I don't have that association of negativity and my profession. Mm-hmm. So like there was never any kind of like I can't stay, and for myself too, I was actually DJing when I originally got like what I would consider to be real sober. And I was like around tons of like champagne, like champagne bottles that are just as big as me, and I mean, I'd get champagne all over me. And it was like, my friend that I was working with my recovery on said, well, as long as you're not licking yourself, and I'm like, I'm not licking myself, dude, then you're fine. So, and definitely like, we've said, we don't become perfect overnight. Our character defenses, whatever you want to call it, don't just like disappear. And the workaholism is a huge one for me. I'm working on being more balanced, right? I guess it would be like with food. And then, the money thing, like I'm just a bitch that I want to be always making money. I've got that addiction, and I don't even want to try to like mess with that one at this moment, because when we get to the next one, when we want to talk about plastic surgery, we'll get into that too. That addiction, because girlfriend, I'm telling you, in my business, like you better have that addiction as you get older, because it's just part of the program. But yeah, so I mean, I think it might be a little bit different for you too, because you've kind of stayed in the business as well throughout your sobriety. Like you didn't leave. So the two of them kind of had where they left. I kind of came in and went out. So what about you?
Thank you for asking. My experience when I got clean and sober and I hit my bottom my 8th time in rehab, I did not dance for 6 months, and I went through rehab, a halfway house, and a recovery house, and I did have that association of I can't dance anymore, people, places, and things. And for me, I went to a sober Halloween dance, and I got dressed up as a burlesque performer, and I'm like, it was I wanted to return to dancing, and it was a process where I was making that decision in sobriety. And at first I was like fearful because, well, is that, my addiction calling me back? And then I went through a process where I was getting guidance and hearing like different views, like, yes, you can do anything sober, and no, don't do that. And it was a tug of war for a while. And then I made the decision where I'm like, I know I don't want to drink. I want to be sober. And I went to work at the club, and I said to myself, if I'm going to do this in sobriety, I want to be a feature entertainer, and I want to do it seriously. So it was with a sober mind that I made the decision to return to dancing, and I did make a career out of it. I did compete in exotic dance competitions and pole dance competitions all over the U.S., and I got to travel and feature regularly, and that's how I ended up moving to Las Vegas. That's why I came to Las Vegas. I forget what the original question was. Going back to dancing and sobriety, I don't even know. But the mentality of recovery and then that connection there. So I knew I didn't want to pick up a drink or drug, and I really loved to dance. So here I am.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that it's a negative experience, because I do feel like it has definitely been a good experience for me. I'm saying do or don't do, but be authentically true to your intuition, to your guidance. And I really wanted to keep doing it. But I knew intuitively my intuition was telling me that there's something else I need to be focused on and doing. And honestly, I'm glad I listened, because I wouldn't be doing today what I'm doing today the way I'm doing it if I was to believe that it was all I could do was to do that. But I loved it. I feel like it was the thing that saved my life. I feel like it was the thing that helped me to learn so much about myself in a more empowering way. There is this lie that like a stripper or somebody who works in the industry, like poor them, like they're a victim. And I heard this so much that, the guys, they're just, taking advantage of the girls. And I never saw that at all. I saw that, sure, a lot of us that got into the industry had stuff that we needed to heal, but a lot of us get into other things, that also need to heal. Especially helping professions. But I don't know, I feel like wherever you go, as long as you're being true to yourself, that's really the point. And I think that as we get into recovery, that's the message, right?
Could I jump in just to what you're saying? And I also, on the opposite side, but the exact same thing, as a woman that's stayed in the business and that's been in the business for such a long time, I think doing things like this, and being open and honest about, having addictions, being in recovery. I'm definitely not the poster child whatsoever at all, but being able to be vulnerable enough and honest about, what my walk in life is. I think it's important, as somebody that's been around a long time, to be able to stand up and say these things, so that individuals that are in the business that maybe might be too afraid or too scared or feel it would ruin their reputation. I've been around 30 years. Go ahead, try to ruin my reputation. Lord, I've done worse things. But I think it's important because quite often you get people that are sex workers that are so afraid to go into recovery because of the judgment of the kind of work that they do that they're going to get from other people in recovery. And then quite often you do have people like what she was saying that were giving her guidance and instructions. Like you get a lot of people that are like, oh my God, you can't do that sober. Yet there's people that are rock stars that do it sober. To me, it's almost the exact same thing. Right. But to a lot of other people, they have their own hangups and their own stereotypes. And so I know that there have been a lot of sex workers that have passed away because they were too afraid to go and get help because of the judgment of others because of what they do. Absolutely. So I think it's really important that those of us that, are still in the business, that we can be vulnerable and honest enough with our stories so that we can, hopefully, that message can get to the right people, that there's a different way and you can still be, I mean, look at her. She's really cool. You can still be cool. She's wrapping herself around Paul. She's sorry. I didn't mean to talk over you, but you know what I'm trying to say.
No, I love that you guys can still do your thing. I fantasize all the time. I did. I had a stripper pole in my ex-boyfriend's apartment. I said, baby, I need this for myself. It's still a part of that identity in the, the devil and angel.
But I think it's also really healthy to know yourself.
Yes.
Right? Because I don't think that everybody can go back and go to be a musician or to be a porn star or a stripper. Right. Not everybody, they can't all go back.
And it's not just the sex industry. It's also somebody being a bartender.
Yeah,
Some people, I know people with 20 years of recovery off of alcohol and drugs, and they've been a bartender and just retired. And so it's about just being true to yourself and knowing, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing.
This is what I can handle doing, and this is good for me, or this is not good for me. I know myself. I'm going to end up using if I do this, then you shouldn't do it. But if you believe that you can do something, that's what I always say, because I get so many women in recovery that come up to me and ask me, well, because they feel so oh, I can't do that anymore, and I'm like, the only person that's saying that you can't is yourself. Right. You get to make the choice. Right. If you feel as though you can do it sober, then do it sober. If you don't, then find something else to do. You want to do what's healthiest for you, but you have to make that decision, and it's by knowing yourself, right? And then sticking to it.
I think that's really the point. I don't, like I said earlier, I don't feel like if I went back to dancing that it would, for me, trigger me for alcohol and drugs, because I didn't do alcohol and drugs while I was dancing. I did it after, like when I would get off and stuff. I was too much of a control freak. But I did have stuff that I'm still working out with my, sexuality, my sex addiction, and stuff like that.
We all are.
Yeah. Well, because I was so, I love dancing. I love being wanted. I love being looked at. I love being checked out.
Sexuality figured out yet?
I feel on the spot. We're on
Oh
camera.
yeah, girlfriend. Do you have your intimacy and sexuality all figured out?
I don't know.
Well, that's my point. My point is, if you know that it's something that intuitively you're feeling, it's not going to be right for you. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that we all have to just beat to our own drum. And that's why this conversation is so important, to make it neutral, to say whether you're in it or you're not in it, it doesn't mean that it is bad. It just means that you're being more authentic and true to yourself about what you feel is right for you. And have you guys felt, being in the industry over time, that the way that you saw, porn or dancing or anything, and how you interacted with people, that it has changed for you?
I'm not sure what you mean. Like
my
has
recovery, your recovery influence.
I can jump right in. Sorry. Yes. Because, oh my God, like I said before, like I was so used to always, like the way that I compartmentalized my sexuality was work sex I did sober, and my good fun sex I did when I was fucked up. And so then when I got sober, I'm like, ugh, I am stuck living in a work sex. This is fucking awful. And I just lost my sex drive for years. I mean, I even quit masturbating, and then I did like a lot of trauma therapy, and that didn't help my sex drive whatsoever at all either. Honestly, I feel as though, now I'm on testosterone because I'm an old bitch, right? I'll be 50 next year, so I'm doing like hormone replacement therapy.
Hey, I'm
the
51.
Testosterone is another drug. Oh my God, I'm telling you it is. Don't let anybody tell you that testosterone is not a drug, because it is. But I am taking it underneath the discretion of a healthcare professional. But that helped a lot. And then, and it like, I just feel like I've been doing this like recovery thing for like 10 years. And now I'm like kind of jumping back into my sexuality, but I have a different perspective of it. But I still got so much fucked up shit around that. Like it's going to take me another 20 years of being in recovery to like figure that all out, So, baby steps. The main thing is that, I love myself. I'm sober. I can see the different things that I'm doing, what's healthy, what's not. Some of it I'm not even sure still yet. Yeah. Some of it I'm just, being the observer and saying, okay, well, this is what I want right now. This is what I need right now. We'll analyze it, da-da-da-da-da. Is this something I'm going to do forever? I don't know. It's a lot of this is life work. And I think when it comes to vulnerability, intimacy, sexuality, especially if you've had any kind of like childhood sexual trauma, you're probably going to be working on that your whole life.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we're definitely going to have plenty to talk about on our next episode, where we talk about body image and we talk about all of that anyway. So stay tuned for that one. But you can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, and on Amazon Fire TV. You can listen to us on the PHLV radio app, or get our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. And if none of that means anything to you, you can go to themeetingspace.com, where all the episodes every week are posted there. And thank you for joining us today on The Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio, here in Las Vegas. See you next week.